I glanced up 3 or 4 times to make sure I had never seen that pilot before. No, he was too young for me to know at all. He must have come into the pilot house after I left the river 20 years before. I crept up in there, and to my joy I was received exactly like the passenger of the old times. The pilot, when he heard the latch of the door, turned round and gave me that sort of indifferent look. A look that was oh so indifferent that if you could just get capital enough and collect enough of it, you wouldn't need any of those refrigerating processes. It would freeze all the sheep in Australia. The old thing exactly. I didn't expect any more notice, and I didn't want any. I sunk down on the bench in the pilot house. There was a little boy about 7 years old playing around. I got into conversation with him for a few minutes, and then he went away, and we were left alone. I and that pilot who had no hospitality, no welcome, for me. And then I began to ask my questions, just as the old-time passenger did. I said, just in the same timid way, "Would you be kind enough to tell me what that thing there is for, that speaking tube?" "Oh," he said, "that speaking tube, that's to call the chambermaid." Well, I felt so happy. The thing was going beautifully. I asked him another question about another speaking tube. He said that was to call the boy that scrubbed the deck. What was that bell for? You know, the bell that signals go ahead and so on. That was to call somebody else. Everything was to call somebody. That man could not apparently tell the truth even by accident. And so I felt perfectly happy. I was getting loaded up just as I wanted, and I would put it in a book. It was jolly good stuff, and I was feeling very comfortable. All of a sudden he says, "Look here, just hold her a minute. I have to go downstairs and get some coffee." And away he went. Well, instinct made me take the wheel. You mustn't leave a steamer to pilot herself. Then I looked round to see if I could make out where we were. And now I recognized the place at once. I knew it perfectly. It was the only place between St. Louis and a point 200 miles below where there were any dangerous rocks. I recognized it as the very worst place in the whole Mississippi River from Lake Itasca to the ocean, a place called the Grand Chain. Even an apprentice pilot who had been through it a few times would never forget it in all his life, because the marks have to be so exactly followed. There is one place where there is a crossing 2 miles long, and in the very midst of it there are 2 rocks. Neither of them shows above water, but they make a little break which you can hardly notice. These deadly rocks are only 70 feet apart, and a Mississippi steamboat is 25 feet wide, so you must not diverge at all. If you hit one of those rocks, you would be in heaven in 2 minutes. I recognized that I was in the Grand Chain, but didn't know exactly what part of it. I suspected, though, that I was in the part that passes between those 2 rocks. However, I knew one thing, that pilot would never have put that wheel into my hands until he had satisfied himself that the boat lay exactly in the right course. He knew that if I had any sense at all, I had sense enough to keep between the marks, which I did most diligently. We passed between the rocks, and I saw those breaks, and I didn't do any harm. But I was very glad when he came back. Then he said, "You go and play fictitious names on people and try to get your fun out of them, but I knew your damn drawl the minute you spoke to that boy." Well, of course, we got to be friendly then. It turned out that just as I was leaving the river, he had finished his apprenticeship. but he had struck a pretty bad snag, and he could only get one pilot to sign his application. He was required to have two. He was looking around, and he found me, and I signed his papers and saved him. Made a pilot of him. So we had a jolly good time. I was always on his watch, and the other fellow's watch, too. I stood all the watches there were. All the day long, no matter which pilot's turn it was, I took the wheel. I couldn't get enough of it. The river was bank full, and from where the Ohio comes in all the way down to New Orleans, there was nothing to do but to keep round in this bend and cross into that bend. You could never make any mistake. A jackass could pilot a steamboat in that part of the river if he had just wit enough to follow the shape of the river. So the pilots would leave me there the whole watch, and there in that sunny country I would stand at the wheel and pilot along down and ponder and think and dream over all that old vanished time on the river. It was delightful, full of pathos, full of poetry, full of the charm of unconsciousness of anything else in the world but that old past. I heard the latch of the pilot-house door raised, but I didn't hear anybody come in. I turned around, and who should be standing there but that Wisconsin hayseed fella I hadn't seen since he showed me the things on the steamboat at St. Louis. He stood there sort of petrified, gazing at me, and he said, well, I won't repeat what he said. It was profane, but it was eloquent. But I mustn't stand here and talk all night of old reminiscences. I was going through all the texts of the chairman, but now I come to think of it, I had forgotten it for the minute. I am entertaining a carbuncle unawares. I have got it on my port hind leg, and it reminds me of its company occasionally. I have greater respect for it than for any other possession I have in the world. I take more care of it than I do of the family. But before I sit down, I just want to thank you once again for your kind and cordial reception of me tonight, and to assure you that I do most sincerely appreciate it and value it.